Once upon a time in a small village called Apia, there lived a beautiful and kind woman named Salima. Selima was so lovely that her beauty and grace caught the attention of many men. Many men came to ask for her hand in marriage, but she categorically refused their advances. Her only reason for rejecting these men was that she did not want to make a mistake and end up marrying the wrong man. She was afraid of being mistreated by someone she might call her husband. For this reason, she turned down many men who did not seem worthy to her. Her mother, growing impatient, began to persuade her to accept one of the suitors and get married. Selima ignored her mother's advice, stating that she had not yet found the man with whom she wanted to spend the rest of her life. All her friends and acquaintances in the village of Apia were married with children, but Selima remained single. The villagers called her by different names. Some even accused her of being possessed by an evil spirit. Despite all the criticism and pressure from people, Selima paid no attention to them and remained graceful at all times. One day, as Selima was on her way to the market, she was bitten by a snake on her left ankle. She fell to the ground, groaning in pain and crying for help, but no one could hear her. She continued to cry for help until, fortunately, a very handsome man named Musa, who was passing by, saw Selima lying on the ground. He immediately ran to her aid. When he got there, he asked her what had happened, and she told him that she had been bitten by a snake. Musa felt pity for Selima and immediately carried her to the village herbalist. The herbalist treated Selima, but she fell asleep during the treatment. When she woke up, she found Musa by her side. After regaining her strength, she thanked Musa for saving her life and immediately fell in love with him. Musa also fell in love with her. It was love at first sight. Musa loved Selima so much that he decided to marry her and make her his wife. He asked Selima for her hand in marriage, and she did not hesitate to accept his proposal. After their successful wedding, Selima was very happy to be married to Musa. She moved into Musa's house, and they began to live as husband and wife. They lived peacefully until the day Musa's mother, Fatima, visited them uninvited. Musa's mother was known for her problematic and arrogant behavior, and everyone did their best to avoid her troubles because she was known for her powers and love of dark magic. She possessed strange magical powers that she had received directly from the goddess of the river in the village of Apia, which made people even more fearful of her. When Salima saw her mother-in-law, she welcomed her warmly and served her food. Her mother-in-law ate, pretending to be a good woman. After eating, when her son Musa returned home, she began to complain to Musa about Selima and the food she had given her. She told Musa that the food Selima had served her was tasteless and lacked meat, and that Selima had added water to her food. However, Musa, knowing his mother well, did not take the complaint seriously. Fatima gradually started making Selima's marital home unbearable. She constantly complained about the slightest mistake, always finding faults with Selima and making her life difficult. Selima, being a good and kind woman, did her best to please and satisfy her mother-in-law despite her cruelty toward her. She even went so far as to wash all her clothes, cook 6 different varieties of meals for her every day to suit her tastes, clean the house to her mother-in-law's satisfaction, wash all her clothes, and take care of her needs. However, Fatima was never satisfied. She always had something negative to say. Salima gradually became a servant in her own marital home, without rest or peace for herself. Every morning, as soon as Musa left the house, Fatima would send Selima on various errands as if she were a servant. Selima endured this despair just to ensure peace in her home. But one day, Selima confided in her husband and told him about the suffering his mother had inflicted on her. Her husband Musa was very upset and unhappy. He tried to talk to his mother about the difficulties she was imposing on his wife. He told his mother to leave Selima alone and stop treating her like a servant. Fatima became angry with Selima for reporting her to her son. She swore to get back at Selima. That same night, Fatima cast a spell on her son Musa while he slept. The spell she cast on him was to make him insensitive to her wrongdoings. No matter how she treated his wife, he would never react or say anything about it. When Fatima realized that she had her son under her control, she turned Selima into a full-time maid, and Selima continued to suffer while her husband remained silent in the face of all the mistreatment inflicted by his mother. But Selima did not know that her husband was under the influence of a spell. Selima continued to endure her mother-in-law's torment, and this went on for months. One day, Selima discovered that she was pregnant with her first child. She was happy to know that she would soon become a mother. She shared the good news with her husband and pleaded with him never to let his mother, Fatima, find out. The torture of Selima by her mother-in-law continued, and Selima found herself growing weaker with each passing week. She decided to leave her marital home, telling her husband that she might travel back to her family and stay there until she gave birth. During their discussion, they did not know that Fatima was standing behind a door, eavesdropping on their conversation, and then she realized that her daughter-in-law was pregnant. Fatima began plotting to prevent her daughter-in-law from leaving. On the day Salima was supposed to leave, Fatima sneaked into her room and added something to Salima's food. After eating, Salima began to feel dizzy and could not leave. She slept for hours, and when she woke up, it was already late at night. She realized that something had been added to the food she had eaten. She was upset and confronted her mother-in-law. Fatima could not believe that Selima had the courage to confront her. Fatima swore to get back at Selima. Fatima used her strange powers to cast a second spell on her son. This time, she cast a spell that would make her son do everything she told him to do. She started by telling him to stop taking care of his wife and also to stop giving her money for food. Her goal was to see Selima starve to death. Selima struggled to take care of herself and her unborn child alone. She managed to survive by doing manual labor for people who paid her a small amount of money, which she used to buy food for herself and also to buy things for her unborn child. This astonished Fatima to see how Selima managed to survive even without her husband's help. Fatima thought that maybe the spell she had cast on her son wasn't enough to make Selima suffer, so she decided to cast a spell on her pregnancy. The spell was meant to prevent Selima's pregnancy from reaching full term. After 6 months, it was almost time for Selima to give birth, and she was excited at the thought that her baby would arrive soon. She had prepared everything, but as the months passed, there was no sign of the baby. Selima began to cry, asking God to help her give birth, but the more she waited, the more everything seemed hopeless. Her mother-in-law began to mock her, calling her names and telling her that this was what she got for defying her. Her husband, under the influence of his mother's charm, didn't care about his wife. Selima had to face this challenge alone. Determined to see her daughter-in-law suffer, Fatima brought another woman for her son to marry. She kicked Selima out of her marital home, even though she was pregnant. When Salima arrived at her mother's house, she told her the whole story. Her mother was deeply moved that her daughter had endured everything alone at the hands of her mother-in-law. She welcomed her daughter and took care of Salima, grateful that her daughter had come out of the situation alive. Salima continued to struggle with her pregnancy. By the 18th month of her pregnancy, she fell ill. Her mother began to worry about her daughter and her pregnancy. She took Selima to an herbalist, and after examining her, the herbalist told Selima's mother that her daughter's pregnancy was under the influence of a spell. With this spell on her, she would never be able to give birth, and she might even die with the pregnancy. Her mother was terrified and asked the herbalist what she could do to break the spell. The herbalist told her to take her daughter to the Apia river and bathe her there, as the spell cast on her daughter originated from the goddess of the Apia river, and only a bath in the river could break the spell. When Selima regained consciousness, her mother took her to the Apia river, where she bathed. After 3 days, she began to feel better and regained her strength. On the 4th day, she went into labor and gave birth to a baby boy. She was very happy and joyful. Meanwhile, back at Musa's house, the woman Fatima had brought for her son to marry turned out to be the daughter of a very powerful chief priest with great magical powers. When Fatima tried to mistreat her the same way she had mistreated Salima, she refused and stood her ground against Fatima. Fatima was unaware that this woman, named Uli, possessed great powers she had received from her father before coming. Fatima attempted to cast a spell on her, but it didn't work. Fatima then decided to poison Uli's food. One night, while Uli was sleeping, Fatima sneaked into her kitchen to add poison to her pot of soup. Uli was not actually asleep. She was only pretending. She saw Fatima add the poison to her food. After Fatima left, Uli took the poisoned pot of soup and swapped it with Fatima's pot of soup. The next morning, Fatima woke up feeling happy, expecting to hear bad news soon. She went into her room and began eating from the pot of soup, not knowing that the food she was eating came from the pot she had poisoned. After eating, she lay down in her room and never woke up again. When Uli discovered that Fatima had added poison to her pot of soup, she was glad that the wicked woman was finally dead. Just after Fatima's death, the spell she had cast on her son lifted from his eyes. He began to search for his wife Salima, who had been sent away by his mother. Uli told Musa how his mother had lied about Salima, making him believe that Salima was a witch, which had led her to follow him home and marry him. Uli asked for Musa's forgiveness and then left his house, never to return. Musa went to apologize to Salima. When he arrived, he discovered that Salima had already given birth. He was very happy and content. He knelt down and asked Salima for forgiveness, explaining that he had not acted intentionally and that his mother had cast a spell on him. Salima, being so kind, forgave him and returned with their son to their marital home. Upon returning, Salima discovered that Fatima had died. She was filled with sorrow and cried bitterly. But in the end, Salima, Musa, and their son lived as a happy family. The moral lesson of this story is to never harm others, because what we wish upon others tends to come back to us. Be kind and gentle toward others.